How's it going? I am Waifu Belector, and I am still very much the only fair human on Earth, and I'm afraid it's only getting worse. Anyway though, we've got a brand new game to talk about, and no need to drag things out. I am of course talking about Stellar Blade, an all-new action game developed by Shift Up as a first effort to enter the premium gaming market. That's right, this is Shift Up's first quote-unquote real game. Prior to this, they had only developed mobile games, most notably Nikke, Goddess of Victory. After finding success with Nikke though, it's clear that Shift Up had even greater ambitions, because here they are attempting to tackle the console market with a full premium title. Well, I've played Stellar Blade, and of course I'm here to talk about it. What's good about it, what's bad about it, and the indifferent facts about it. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of whether or not you're willing to buy this game. Or maybe I'll say some stuff you agree with and you can nod along in approval for the duration. Either way, let's fucking go. So, a second ago, I mentioned the mobile game Nikke. This is a game that I'm actually familiar with. It's something I like to play when I'm not doing anything else, I guess. Because of course I do. Can't be Waifu Belector if I'm not belecting some fucking waifus. But I honestly didn't immediately make the developer connection back when Stellar Blade was revealed and called Project Eve. It just didn't click until later. You know that, wait a minute, Shift Up, those are the Nikke people. And you know, once I did, obviously the sexy main character made a lot of sense. But I started to pay more attention to Stellar Blade because of the approach to Nikke beforehand. The thing about Nikke is that it is of a very high quality in comparison to other waifu collecting gacha mobile games. The presentation, execution, and frankly the sex appeal of Nikke is a cut above the competition. In these gacha games, typically you pull and try to get whatever waifu, but when you do, in the actual gameplay part of it, they're like chibi versions of themselves, and it always just kinda rendered the whole thing a little bit pointless to me. Nikke didn't and doesn't do this. You get to actually see your waifus, right? Not to mention, Nikke has English voice acting. All of these are things that very quickly put Nikke amongst the top of similar waifu collecting games like Azure Lane and Blue Archive. I'm mentioning this because what this communicated to me was that Shift Up prioritized leveraging quality to attract people in the midst of competition. If you go that extra mile, spend the extra time, the extra money to make your product not only be superior, but present superiorly, then that effort will pay off in a big way. So I thought that if they approached Stellar Blade with the same kind of mentality they clearly approached Nikke with, we could end up with something great. Now obviously making a fucking full-priced AAA title is on a different level than a mobile gacha game, so there was still a decent chance that they'd fuck it up a bit. But now, having played Stellar Blade, it's actually even better than I thought it would be. After playing the demo, I thought that I was in for another fucking godforsaken Souls game, but thank the gaming gods, that's not the case. That's not the game. Don't get me wrong, there's obviously a good hearty chunk of Souls influence in this game, but that's all it is. Souls influence, not a full-fledged entry into the Souls-like genre. And the first level, which is the demo, does a pretty competent Souls impression. But then the game starts to reveal its true colors shortly after. What we actually have here is a Jedi Fallen Order / Survivor situation. It's an action-adventure game with some Souls influence. It's a pseudo-Souls. And it's kind of wild how this game feels like a Souls-like, it feels like Nier Automata, it feels like Fallen Order, and yet still feels like itself as well. There are many clear inspirations, but Stellar Blade doesn't really feel like a creativity devoid patchwork of other people's ideas. It instead has woven its inspirations into its own idea. The strongest influence though, stronger than Souls, stronger than Bayonetta, stronger than anything, is clearly Nier. They clearly love Nier over at Shift Up. I mean, 2B was in Nikke. But even with all that, I promise Stellar Blade does carve out its own identity. A little bit through its story, which I'll get into, but mostly through its gameplay. So this being a pseudo Souls, it does have some challenging combat. It's not the hardest game ever, but you likely won't get out of it without breaking a sweat somewhere. But I'll keep reiterating, this is an action game, not an action RPG. So everything has to be curated to be pretty approachable once you have access to it, despite the fact that you may not be side questing much. Of course, side questing and looking around will help because you'll find more of the items that raise your attack or raise your health or beta skills, aka super attacks, but you aren't gonna stumble on a more powerful sword in a cave. Anyway, the game starts off playing pretty soulsily, but you'll progressively gain more and more tools to be used in combat that make it feel incredibly far off from being a Souls game. And Stellar Blade is actually pretty quick to get kooky with the combat. Depending on what you spend your skill points on, you can make the early parts of the game pretty fucking breezy. And by the end of things, you'll have so much shit at your disposal that really nothing can survive if you just unload the full arsenal, save for a couple of final bosses. Like action games go, you are rewarded for learning the game and engaging with combat mechanics. Stellar Blade, however, leans quite a bit harder into the direction of engaging with combat mechanics. If you do everything dies, for the most part. And that fact is a little bit of a detriment to the otherwise stellar combat, pun intended, but that only comes into play once you've got all of the tools unlocked. So it isn't for the entirety of the game or anywhere near it. The moment-to-moment combat, though, is actually really satisfying. Attempting to react with proper dodges and parries while also trying the optional combat techniques like parry follow-ups is super fun. Especially because the damage output of enemies isn't typically over punishing, keyword typically, sometimes shit ramps up, but yeah, the mostly not overbearing damage is thanks in part to the shield system. You have a shield which makes you take reduced damage based on the shield level. The shield starts at max level, but every time you get bopped, your shield level goes down. Once your shield is completely gone, now you're fucked. This is when shit starts hurting. And enemies also have shields as well as balance ticks. Enemies each have a certain amount of little yellow balance ticks telling you exactly how many times you need to perfect parry them to open them up for a big critical hit. So it's kind of fun deciding what you want to go for per boss fight. Sometimes it's easier to just keep knocking them off balance and crit them to death, or you can just deplete the shield and spam beta skills. Also, the parrying in this game feels appropriately fair, whereas a lot of the time with games that are more firmly soulsy or difficult, parrying feels less like a viable mechanic and more like a trap to try and get you hit. But luckily, that is not the case here. Anyway, now let's talk about the game's structure and layout. Throughout the game, Stellar Blade will keep jumping back and forth between mostly linear dungeon levels and large open zones. I mentioned how the opening level does a Souls impression. This is one of those dungeons, but the linear dungeons get less and less Souls-like the more you play. And this isn't really a strength or a weakness that happens, it's just how the game goes. And in both the dungeons and open zones, I think the things like enhancement items and crafting materials are appropriately hidden and usually pretty fun to track down and get, more so in the open zones than in the dungeons. Because in the open areas, it feels more like you're getting rewarded for your curiosity. That still exists in the dungeons because you might have to go off the beaten path, but it's lessened a bit because you are in such a confined space with less options. Oh, and yes, I did mention crafting materials, but this isn't an RPG. I know, it isn't. But they did tack on what really barely feels like any attempt at RPG elements. Materials are really mostly used for crafting cosmetics and sometimes very mildly enhancing your gear slots. And gear slots aren't like torso armor and helmet and weapon slot and all that. It's more like what would be like gems or something in a different game, where you get very mild stat modifiers like, oh, plus 6.5% damage reduction, you know? You just plop them in and really don't think about them. And you can use some materials to very slightly enhance those. Goes from 6.5 to 7.5. But the bulk of the materials are for purchasing cosmetics, because you find nanosuits, aka costumes, hidden in the world, but then you need the materials to craft them. And some of the same materials are also used to unlock new hairstyles. Honestly, this material and crafting stuff is a very shoehorned attempt at adding some level of RPG to Stellar Blade, and it feels pointless. What additional interchangeable gear we're given in-game feels inconsequential and really doesn't need to be there. The cosmetic unlocks can work the exact same way, but we can do without all the crafting and material talk. The same effect could be achieved if we were just getting cosmetic tokens or some shit like that. I don't know. Regardless of all that though, the rewards you get from searching the nooks and crannies of the world are usually pretty worth it, because you're either unlocking new costumes or you're finding the items necessary to increase your base stats. Another thing that helps you to both explore new areas and acquire new shit is doing some good old-fashioned side questing. Pretty early in the game, you arrive at a town, and this serves as sort of your main hub. And the people there will also have quests for you to do. Now, very few of these quests are extremely interesting, but they do help to get you to explore and find new things and areas. And as I said, the rewards are usually pretty decent. However, the tales attached to these side quests are all mostly incredibly forgettable. In totality, the side quests aren't great, but they're pretty inoffensive. This isn't as bad as the king of bad side quests, Final Fantasy XVI. But while we're here talking about narratives of the side quests, let's just talk about the narrative of the entire game. And I'll start by acknowledging the game world and its tone. So, the game is bleak, at times almost in a try-hard kind of way. They really want you to know that it's a bleak world out there. I'll back this up a little bit by going back to side quests. No kidding, there's got to be at least 10 different side quests where someone says, oh no, my friend is stuck somewhere, or hey, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while, can you go find him? And then you go and you find the person you're looking for, and they are very predictably dead. I swear, there's like 10 of those. It gets unintentionally comical, right? So the tone is there, it's established, and they just keep attempting to hammer it home so hard that they end up accidentally making it less effective. Now, the actual story kind of requires for me to break it up to properly cover it, because I'd argue that the story of the world that Stellar Blade is in is actually good. It's pretty interesting, fairly creative, and surprisingly easy to follow. However, the story of our characters, mainly Eve, is on the opposite end of the spectrum. The character work in this game is nothing. You couldn't love these characters if they were your fucking siblings. I felt more attached to other people's pawns in Dragon's Dogma 2. So yeah, the characters and Eve as the main character, obviously being a focal point of the story, is really no good. And it's not even like she is just a vehicle to tell a story about the world. Her story is a focus. There is a lot of time spent on her and even her companions as characters at times. And it's just so fucking boring. So despite having a laughably bleak world, the narrative surrounding that world and unfolding is a good one. The lore is good. It's just a shame that the piece in that world we're really zeroed in on is such a fucking snoozer. I think that whole take will make more sense if you've played the game, but I guess you just gotta take it for what it is if you haven't. Less than strong story aside though, Stellar Blade is doing a lot right. I just think it's a really fun action game to play. Fun enough that it's easy to play for more hours than intended, honestly. I did that a couple of times during a couple of sessions. The combat, while great, isn't perfect, mind you. There are a couple of skills you can get that just make a lot of things a cakewalk. and that kinda neutralizes some of the fun. It reminds me a lot of Jedi Fallen Order in that way, where you figure out what's good and everything gets relatively breezy after that. Something they fixed in Jedi Survivor, so hopefully if there's a sequel to this, they can fix it. But yeah, Stellar Blade is fun to fight in. Plus, it's rewarding and fun to look around in. And those important core facets carry it most of the way. It's only on the way past the stars where the rocket starts running out of fuel. A couple of combat issues that I've already mentioned and a somewhat dismal narrative stop this game from being something phenomenal that blows your fucking head off. But what you're left with, in my opinion, is still a great game. If I had to put a number on it, I'm feeling like a sexy little 8 out of 10. Great game, a kind of a soft 8. Right? Like, I feel like it barely gets out of that 7.5 for me, but it does make it out of there, right? One more little fuck up and they would have 7.5, but I think they make it out of there. I don't know, maybe that'll change once I've thought even more about this, but I'm saying 8 for now, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, the game is well worth your time. I recommend you give it a go if it sounds like it's up your alley in any way. Also, I just quickly want to mention that this game's music is good, but it's like a mix of Nier and Street Fighter 6, which is exactly how I'd probably describe Nikkei's music, so I guess that checks out. Anyway, this is the end of the video though. Leave your thoughts and comments telling me how stupid and wrong I am, and please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I really appreciate it, but until next time, I am Waifu Belector. I am just a normal guy. I like hentai, and how can Eve not have Rappy and Anise costumes? 0 out of 10. Goodbye.